You're now listening to the Adiel Gorel Show. Each episode I'll bring you the latest news from my discussions with top health and wellness experts so that you can bring yourself into better health. Today on the Adiel Gorel Show.
Well, this is something that I picked up very early in my career as I delivered so many babies, is that the prime directive of life, whether we want to pursue it ourselves or not, is the creation of new life, reproduction. And we're the only species on the planet, humans, that actually try to control our reproductive destiny. There's no other animal species that says, this is not a good year to mate. It just doesn't happen that way. So recognizing and accepting how our bodies have evolved for optimum reproductive success.
Hi everyone, it's a joy to be here with you again. Today I'm very excited. We have a special guest. Dr. Felice Gersh is here to talk to us about things I think we all need to know, whether we are men, women, or anything else. So Dr. Gersh, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. It's such a fun experience to talk about these things with you.
I love it too. And if you can tell us about your own path, your own journey, something that you were trained as an MD, but then all MDs choose a certain path that they go. You chose women's health. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's not uncommon for people who go into medicine to look for answers that are relevant to themselves or their family members, as we know. Well, when I was in college and then into medical school, I had very irregular menstrual cycles. And then when I was in medical school, it actually disappeared for 2 years. And it's like, what's wrong with me? And I went to one of the head honchos at my medical school in the OBGYN department who said, well, you're not trying to get pregnant, just go on birth control pills. And it's like, that doesn't seem like a solution. Like, what's wrong with me? But being like pretty obedient in those days, I went on birth control pills and they made me feel pretty yucky. And then as I kept going through my career, I said, I'm really interested in women's health issues, being a woman and having obviously a health issue. So I ended up actually, as I trained and learned, I self-diagnosed myself with polycystic ovary syndrome. And I became very interested in, the unique issues that distinguish female bodies from male bodies. And I just kept forging ahead, and I delivered thousands of babies, did lots and lots of surgeries. And then I got to a point in my career when I just needed to get a little more sleep because all those deliveries were really completely eradicating my circadian rhythm. So I decided painfully, but then like every transition, you move forward. And I gave up doing obstetrics after 25 years. And then I started interviewing my pharmaceutical reps and making them show me the studies that they used to bring the product to market. Like, how did they get FDA approved? And I was shocked when I actually looked at the drugs I was prescribing, how little they deviated from the placebo effect. Yet look at the array of side effects. So I felt really lost at that point. It's like, I can do lots of surgeries, but that's end stage disease. Like, what am I really doing that's proactive? So I went on my own journey. I ended up doing the 2-year fellowship in integrative medicine at the University of Arizona. And I finished over 10 years ago. I've never looked back. I've incorporated lots of courses and training in functional medicine. And then, as often is the case, I became the teacher myself. I had always taught. I was on the faculty at USC Keck School of Medicine, teaching surgery for many, many years. And then I became affiliated with the University of Arizona, the fellowship program, which I'm still part of their faculty. And so I teach and lecture, and that's how we got together. So I've just kept moving forward and learning and having to be what I call a synthesizer. I look at all the data across many different fields of science and medicine, and then I try to put it together into a cohesive whole so I can apply it clinically. Because so often science is fantastic and interesting, but the clinicians, which I am a clinician, they don't actually utilize all that information, and they keep doing the same old stuff from like 20, 25 years ago. And so that's not my path. I like to know the science and then use it and then educate and, just try to be all around useful for women and their health paths. And also, of course, their husbands and other significant others, because as I look at it, when you have someone who you're partnering in life with, it's like a three-legged race. So we got to keep everyone healthy, or you're never going to cross the finish line in good shape. So that's my mission and that's my journey.
I feel like what you just said has so much for me, at least as the listener, to unpack. It's almost like I don't know where to start. I'll start with a simple thing that you mentioned, that you blindly, obeyed the head guy at the medical school who was probably a respected, doctor, and that's such a telling, instinct, because even though you were a medical student, what he or she said was the Bible. You go on the pill, you went on the pill, and you said it made you feel yucky. We all know that going on the pill is anything but simple and innocuous. It has all kinds of ramifications. And yet, even though you knew the medical side, even though just from listening to you, I know that you are thorough enough to look at the side effect, you followed. And that's such a critical thing, because before we even delve into your specialty, how many of us just follow? Oh, my doctor told me. And then when you said also, you went and looked into the FDA approvals and saw how sketchy the whole thing was in some cases, where it was barely placebo plus or minus, and yet the array of side effects is enormous. I mean, one would think about the ads we see on television. So, I mean, I don't watch ads because I skip them, but nevertheless, sometimes you're busy, you're doing something, and the ads run. And I see mainly two ads on TV. One, my fast food is cheaper, not better, cheaper. Sometimes it's tasty and it's cheap. That's one. The other one is, take this amazing drug, take this incredible drug, and then they show the people frolicking in the grass with their grandkids, while a narrator said, this could kill you, this could cause horrible. I mean, that's what I see. And so if you, a sophisticated, smart, MD to be, followed blindly at that time, what about most people? They say, my doctor told me. And we need to remember that medical school is very valuable, but in a way, it looks at the body as a machine in some ways, as a machine, and sometimes with separate parts, not a holistic, so that's fascinating that you would recognize it. I'm sorry, I have something with my earphone. That you would recognize it and acknowledge it. And now another question that comes to mind. When somebody says, my doctor said, and that's it, you do what your doctor said, the higher the rank of the doctor, the more it's the Bible. For example, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. Let's say UCSF is a very well-respected hospital. So let's say you have a doctor that achieved one of the highest ranks. He or she is running the entire department. Well, what does it really mean in real life? They're busy with paperwork, with politics, with hiring, with firing, with all of, and their patients. Do they really have time to follow the research? Mm-hmm. Maybe not. Maybe the higher you are, the less time you have to follow the research. In my experience, I actually found sometimes that people who are not even, MDs, but have the patience and the wherewithal to follow the research are much more on top of what's really going on. But I'm digressing a little bit. It was very heartening to hear you speak like this because, as an MD, you could conceivably be looked upon as the selling arm of those medications. They send you the representatives, they take you to lunch. It was very refreshing right there in the very beginning to hear you speak like that.
Well, it's everything you said is also resonating with me like exponentially because I even talk about the words that are used, like doctor's orders. And it's like, what am I, a dictator? I can't order anyone around. I'm a consultant, like a medical consultant, and we work as a team to look at goals and, conflicts in life with scheduling and everything else to try to create a therapeutic plan that's actually going to be able to be implemented and actually get results. And there's no doctor's orders, that just the very notion of that. And also like this whole thing of prestige, because I have met many people in very prestigious positions. And then when I actually have conversations, it's a sort of shocking how much they don't know. I mean, you can't, we don't want to like bash everybody, but you can't, the old like cliche, you can't judge a book by its cover. Like you don't really know what they know by the label they have acquired, is what I'm saying. So definitely these are all very important things, and everyone should trust their own instincts. I think that's what it comes down to. When it feels wrong, maybe it is wrong. So, get other advice, get other opinions, from trusted other, sources so that you can really think it through to make up your own mind, rather than having somebody dictate to you.
Yeah, but looking at it even with compassion and understanding, everybody is a human being. You can only have so much on your plate. Going back to my example of the head of the department at UCSF, their time is so consumed with everything else. When the hell are they gonna, they're not gonna sleep? So they fall behind on the latest research almost all the time, unless some graduate student fills them in, which may or may not happen because the graduate student is of a lesser stature. They say, oh, don't tell me that, I know better. Stuff like that.
Yeah, the hierarchy, right.
Right. So now going back to women's health, I mean, you noted in your writings that in the areas of heart health, brain health, and sexuality and sexual health, males and females are different. And now this discussion is not how a person identifies, but how they are manifested physically vis-a-vis hormones, and they are. So let's start with the heart. Obviously, still, I'm not sure if it's the number one still or if the number two. Heart disease is an issue that everybody wants to know about, men and women. Supposedly, women may have an advantage, but heart disease and chronic inflammation is the number one or two killer for men and women. How is heart health, let's just talk about that one thing, different between men and women?
Well, this is something that I picked up very early in my career as I delivered so many babies, is that the prime directive of life, whether we want to pursue it ourselves or not, is the creation of new life, reproduction. And we're the only species on the planet, humans, that actually try to control our reproductive destiny. There's no other animal species that says, this is not a good year to mate. It just doesn't happen that way. So recognizing and accepting how our bodies have evolved for optimum reproductive success. Now, in order for that to happen in a woman, she needs to get through pregnancy. Of course, she needs to be fertile and get through pregnancy, which is the ultimate stress test on the female body. And sadly, unfortunately, many women are failing that test. And now it's been finally recognized by me for years, but now in the conventional community, that knowing at every stage of life, what is the woman's obstetrical history? Like, did she have gestational diabetes, hypertension? Did she have, any kind of ill outcome like premature delivery and so on? All of that portends to problems later in life because it's really a stress test. So in order to be successful with pregnancy, you need to have an amazing cardiovascular system because the blood volume dramatically increases during pregnancy. So the heart of a female has much greater energy capacity than a male heart because it has to pump so hard during pregnancy. And that's manifesting, by the way, now, and there's a lot in the literature about an increasing incidence of cardiomyopathy and heart failure in women who are pregnant and also right after in the postpartum time, because these are really stresses on the heart. So in order to facilitate this unbelievable need for energy from the female heart has more mitochondria. It has to pump harder. And what works the engine, you might say, of these energy producers, the mitochondria, is actually estrogen. And that's not well recognized. So estrogen is essential for the creation of energy through what's called the electron transport chain to make energy. And also when mitochondria create energy, it creates byproducts like metabolic waste, which is called superoxide. This is totally toxic. In order for that not to stay in the mitochondria and basically kill and destroy the mitochondria, you need to convert it to hydrogen peroxide, which can then diffuse out of the mitochondria, and then in the cell it can be turned into harmless water. Well, in order for that to happen, you need a special enzyme, superoxide dismutase. This enzyme that will convert the superoxide poison into hydrogen peroxide, which can then get out of the mitochondria, requires estrogen. So all of this works great and perfectly when you have adequate estrogen. In addition, arteries require, obviously, a lot of estrogen. Now, why? Well, maybe obvious just to me. Why is that? Because estrogen actually triggers the function of a very vital enzyme called endothelial nitric oxide synthase. And this enzyme helps to create a very important gas that's an antioxidant that keeps the artery linings healthy, keeps the arteries from constricting, also keeps platelets from aggregating and causing unwanted blood clots. And the nitric oxide is so critical, and you don't make it in the arteries themselves unless you have adequate estrogen. So we live in a world now where we're filled with endocrine disruptors, these chemicals that interfere with estrogen signaling. And these can, of course, create all kinds of problems. During pregnancy, you need to have a very healthy placenta to make the estrogen, and sometimes that's not happening. And then later in life, during menopause, when the ovaries no longer are making estrogen, then all of these systems are not going to work optimally. And what's really interesting is that if you do an echocardiogram on a woman in menopause, you will often see a problem that most cardiologists completely ignore and just say, well, that's typical. Well, it's typical, but it's not good. And that is what's called mild diastolic dysfunction. That's actually a sign that you can see on the ultrasound of the heart when it's moving, the echocardiogram, of an energy deficient heart, which happens when you don't have enough energy to help the mitochondria to work properly. And then you have a stiffer heart. The heart doesn't relax well. And that can lead to a special type of heart failure, which can also link into the more conventional congestive heart failure. So, and this is fairly unique to women. So, of course, it's pretty much ignored. And it's so important to understand these differences in how the vasculature needs estrogen, which you're not going to have if you don't have healthy ovaries during the reproductive years. And we know that reproductive problems are so incredibly prevalent. And we mentioned birth control pills, so I just have to bring them into the equation here. There's now published articles that women who begin on oral contraceptives, and probably similars, because they don't have data on everything, of course, but on oral contraceptives in their teen years have a higher rate of cardiovascular events, negative events happening like heart attacks, strokes in later years as a consequence of being on birth control pills, which don't have the human hormones that you need to make and maintain a healthy vascular system. So this is like really huge stuff that is not well recognized, that hormones are essential for vascular health, for cardio, for the heart working properly, and that at different stages of life, there are different demands on the cardiovascular system. And we need to be considering all the different things that come interplay to change how the heart can work optimally, and then do everything to try to keep the heart and the arteries in pristine shape as much as humanly possible.
So once again, I feel very grateful for your thorough and far encompassing answer, which once again, for me, there's a ton of things to unpack. And once again, I don't exactly know where and how to start, but I will start with a simple one. So very fascinating for me that because of those extra demands on the female heart has this extra resilience or strength relative to the male heart. We'll talk about that in a second. Mm-hmm. Now, a very simple-minded question. They say that as a rule of thumb, the heart is the size of our fist. That's very rough. Now, obviously, for other reasons we can talk about, usually the male fist is typically a lot bigger than the female fist. So, on average, the female heart is smaller, and yet it's more potent in terms of the energy production via the mitochondria, right?
Right. So a male heart has to be the size to support a larger scale body. So yeah, males tend to be significantly larger overall, have greater muscle mass and so on. So of course they need to have a very strong heart. It's just that they never have the stress on their heart that is inevitable with a pregnancy. So we just have a higher concentration of these amazing mitochondria. And just as a side issue, I just want to touch on is that, like all the organs, the heart is innervated by the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. That's called the autonomic nervous system. This also is modulated or regulated in great measure by estrogen. And women tend to be more sensitive. They tend to have more sensitivity to pain and so on. And the heart has a very, very robust autonomic nervous system supply, which makes women actually, and this is a fascinating topic, in itself, be more at risk for having a very, very unique kind of a condition that occurs almost exclusively in postmenopausal women called Takotsubo syndrome or broken heart syndrome, where a combination or an acute stressor can actually trigger this huge sympathetic, like this stressor kind of output to the heart that can cause it to actually dysfunction and create a similarity in terms of like a heart attack. It's this unique thing that can happen to women that it's just like an amazing emotional kind of a charge to the heart that's called broken heart syndrome because of lack of proper regulation of the autonomic nervous system. It's just another example of how unique and different the female heart is, and it encompasses the vascular system, the myometrium, the muscle of the heart, and also the neurological supply to the heart.
That is incredibly fascinating. And going back to some of what you said, you talked about nitric oxide, which that is very supportive of the blood flow and making the blood vessels. Now, you mentioned specifically that estrogen is very necessary or required. And now I'm jumping over to the male side, and we know that nitric oxide has become a very popular name when it comes to men's sexuality. Mm-hmm. So they don't. I'm sure men have some estrogen, but certainly not in the same quantity. How does that reconcile?
Oh, well, I'm so glad you brought that up because I always say estrogen, although you're not maybe supposed to have favorites, but it kind of is my favorite hormone. And I say men should love it too. You should not underestimate how much estrogen is in your body. The difference is that your estrogen is made locally at different sites in the body, and it's made from testosterone. So this is like a very important, just foundational piece of information. Estradiol is the estrogen made by ovaries. So that's the estrogen that you have during the reproductive life. Not pregnancy is a unique state when the placenta makes a different hormone as well, a different type of estrogen in addition called estriol. But putting pregnancy aside, the ovaries make estradiol. Now, all estradiol is made from testosterone. 100%, not 90%, 100%. And it's made through the conversion of testosterone into estradiol by an enzyme called aromatase. And this enzyme exists in many organs. Of course, it exists in the ovaries, but it also exists in other organs like arteries. In arteries themselves, they have this enzyme. And men make estradiol that then runs the machinery to make the enzyme that makes nitric oxide by the conversion of their testosterone in artery walls into estradiol. That's why testosterone is so important for vascular health in men. That's why it drives me crazy when they have these crazy kinds of articles that say testosterone is bad for men's cardiovascular system. It's like, where are you coming from? That's so ridiculous. And there are many organs that make estradiol, and the heart can make it, and the gut can make it, and the brain makes it when we get there. And then, of course, in order to have proper male erectile function, you need to have nitric oxide because it causes the artery to be healthy, to dilate, so you can then have the engorgement that can cause the erection. So, and then of course it's for feeding of every other organ, including the coronary arteries that feed the heart itself. So estrogen is made all over the male body, and it's made locally, so it's not circulating. So hormones have different ways that they can interact. An endocrine hormone is one that's made in an organ, then it goes in the bloodstream, and it's used in a certain fashion to create information to a cell in a distant organ. And then paracrine is when the hormone is made locally in an organ for use within that organ. They even have what's called intracrine, where a hormone is made within a cell for use in that cell. So it's complicated, but definitely men have vascular health because they have testosterone, which converts into estradiol.
Okay, so jumping over to the male side for just a second. I have an 18-year-old son. That's a typical age when they're into lifting weights and being very muscular. Many of his friends and him too go to the gym. So he reads all those magazines about bodybuilding. And those magazines decry the process of testosterone converting to estrogen and look at it as a horrible, dirty thing. And they suggest all kinds of things to take, natural or not, to prevent it, because you want as much testosterone as you can. Well, based on what you just said, that is a false notion.
That is totally false. And that actually leads into, like, why is this idea of sort of being anti-estrogen? And like, especially in men, like, where is that even coming from? Like, how do men get what you might call men boobs, right? How is that happening? Well, it turns out that, as I mentioned, many organs can convert androgens, the male type hormones, androgens, much of which comes from the adrenal gland, by the way, as a different androgen, DHEAS, and that converts to DHEA, and that can convert to estrone, okay, the estrogen called estrone. And fat tissue, adipose tissue, is very imbued with the enzyme aromatase. So fat tissue makes estrogen, but it predominantly makes estrone. Now, why would that even happen? Well, it turns out that estrogen, in the form of predominantly estradiol, it actually is a modulator, like regulator of the immune system. It turns on inflammation when you need it, like to fight a pathogen, like a virus, bacteria, and to deal with trauma, injury to the body. So it turns on the inflammatory process when needed, and then it also turns it off. Like it does the on switch and the off switch. The off switch then leads to resolution of inflammation and promotion of healing. All of that is regulated by estrogen in the form of estradiol. So when you have a very significant amount of inflammation in the body, which is what happens when you have endocrine disruptors, when you have poor diet, nutrient deficiencies, and with hormone deficiencies as we age, they call it inflammaging, like the inflammation associated with aging. In younger people, they call it metaflammaging, metabolic dysfunction that's associated with this chronic low-grade inflammation in the body, which of course underlies pretty much all the chronic diseases. So when you have a lot of inflammation in the body, it upregulates the enzyme aromatase. Now, that's the body's mechanism for dealing with infections. Now, the problem is that's supposed to be short-lived, like you heal the infection, then you heal the problems that are caused by the damage from the infectious agent or the trauma. But when it's chronic and unrelenting, like there's no end in sight, then you have this chronic state of inflammation. You have chronic upregulation of the enzyme aromatase in organs like fat. And when you have high levels of inflammation, it actually downregulates the enzyme that allows conversion of estrone, which is like only working the on switch for inflammation. And it sort of prevents estrone from turning into estradiol, which is going to regulate the entire process, the on switch and the off switch. So you get stuck in like on switch mode, which promotes even more inflammation. So then you make even more of this estrone. Now, breast tissue has predominantly one type of estrogen receptor, which is called alpha, which is the one that's also on the immune cells that are called innate immune cells, the first line of defense of the body. So you're actually triggering growth of breast tissue and activation of the immune system to instill the inflammatory state. So it's everything you don't want, and it's not like the way a natural homeostatic body would work. Okay, this is a dysfunctional, metabolically unhealthy body. But then you get this overwhelming production of estrone from fat tissue, which is getting into the bloodstream and circulating in men and then reaching other organ systems like the male breast, which will actually grow them. And then estrogen in the form of estrone actually is then going to be more pro-inflammatory, and then your metabolic systems are not working properly, and you'll create more fat tissue because estradiol helps regulate the system of metabolism that turns on signaling agents like AMP kinase and works with these other enzyme systems called the sirtuins that everybody wants to access because they're like considered the fountain of youth and they create fat burning. All of that is blocked when you don't have estradiol properly in the body and you have all this estrone. So it feeds this inflammatory pro-fat making mechanism. So in that case, for men, the solution isn't block that enzyme aromatase, because you're blocking it everywhere in your brain, in your arteries, as well as in your fat tissue. The solution is to get proper amounts of testosterone and work on down-regulating that inflammatory state by eating an anti-inflammatory diet, by exercising, by working on stress, improving sleep, dealing with circadian rhythm dysfunctions. And it's really, I'm so glad you brought that up because I'm not reading those 18-year-old magazines, And so it's really very upsetting to me that young men are thinking, I want to block my conversion of testosterone into estrogen. That is totally missing the point. What you want to do is not become chronically inflamed in the first place. And that's a lifestyle choice. And also, everything that you need to do is going to take effort. There's no magic pill for that. And, that every male needs to know that estrogen is your friend. What you don't want is estrogen made by fat tissue in the form of estrone, which is going to feed that inflammatory process. And that's what actually can increase, for example, cancers in women that are estrogen dependent. It's really this combination of inflammation that's unrelenting, that causes DNA instability, DNA breakage, and so on, and that you can't properly institute this process called autophagy, which is like cellular renewal, and programmed cell suicide, where you get rid of senescent, yucky cells and ones that have misfolded proteins that can lead to cancer cells. And then you don't want this unrelenting production of the wrong type of estrogen, which makes people think of estrogen as evil when it's not. They're not aware of the process and what's going on. But this is not estrogen made in the ovaries. This is made in like fat tissue that has only one receptor effect, which is the one that is pro-inflammatory, the alpha. So we need to not call all estrogens the same. Estrogens are a family of hormones, and understand there are differences, different receptors, different activities, and then work on foundational reasons for why things are happening, instead of saying estrogen is bad in men, let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of inflammation and excessive adipose tissue and chronic stress and endocrine disruptors and such, and get adequate testosterone. I'm a big fan of testosterone for men. By the way, young men who have very low testosterone, that is instantly a sign of a chronic inflammatory state in that male. Chronic inflammation will lower the testicular production of testosterone and increase the peripheral production of estrone. So the solution to a young male having low testosterone is never to give testosterone, which can potentially permanently shut down his ability to make testosterone, and rather to work on the underlying issues that are creating this inflammatory state in the young male, and then help him to get basically his health back so that he can make testosterone properly.
This is so vast. Everything, yeah. Every one of those subjects could fill a whole interview, and maybe we should do another one or two. But again, where to begin? I mean, it seems like in the bodybuilding literature, which I see, they talk about, I think they call it gynecomastia, whatever, the men boobs.
Male boobs, right?
So once again, what's the medical solution? Cut it off. Cut it off. Now you're done. But the way you're talking about it, men boobs could be a blessing, because they're a visual red light to say, hey, something is off balance here. Go to see your doctor and work, your real doctor, and work with something. Not just cut off those boobs and be done with it. That's one thing. The other thing is, I believe in the culture of especially young males or weightlifting or bodybuilding, the word testosterone is a very powerful word, and it denotes maleness, strength, all the good things. The word estrogen, oh, that's a woman. I'm not a woman. Leave me alone. There was a movie with Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the way they made the movie makes you see how the reaction is. They made Arnold Schwarzenegger pregnant. Okay.
Oh, I think
it was a comedy. It was a comedy. So they filled him up with estrogen, according to the movie was very simple-minded. But the point is, there is one scene where he's all pregnant and he watches the commercials, and he watches a commercial for, an airline bringing the grandkids to grandma. And he's watching it as he's crying. Oh, they're coming to grandma. So that they were trying to show him the most simple-minded thing. When you pump him up with estrogen, he becomes a crybaby or very emotional. So that's the notion that testosterone, mainly manly, estrogen, get rid of it. And of course, it's false based on what you say. Stay tuned for part 2 of this interview. Thank you for joining us today. I know you love what's coming next in part 2. Be sure to click the subscribe button for more videos.